Namaskar students. Today we'll be moving into our lecture number 11, which is on the territorial state and global politics. Why are we talking about the territorial state? So it's very important for us to understand the evolution of the modern liberal state, because this is closely aligned to the study of international relations and international politics in the 20th century. Because most of the theories accept the state as a major player. And the realist theory, which is the most dominant theory of international relations, literally is a state-centric theory. They believe that the international system is a state-centric system. And hence the state is the major actor in international relations. So it's very important for any student of international relations or even political science for that matter to understand the rise of the modern nation state. So in this lecture, we will be looking at the modern nation state and its evolution. When we're talking of the territorial state, see, changing historical forms. We finished lectures on globalization, and in globalization, we were talking about the shifting reach of political power, authority, and forms of rule. Now, the earliest phases of political globalization were accompanied by a slow and largely haphazard development of the territorial politics. Now, the emergence of the modern nation state and the incorporation of all civilizations within the interstate system, however, created a world organized and into domestic and foreign realms, meaning we had what was clearly internal matters and what was clearly called external matters. And what defined this? Territoriality, that is boundaries, bounded national politics, and the outer world of diplomatic, military, and security affairs. Now, when we're talking of the territorial state, what are we talking about? We are talking about the realms where there is no, clear difference, where the modern nation states are built on what? Political, legal, and social institutions. From the early 20th century, this division became more fragile and increasingly mediated by regional and global flows and processes, meaning there were especially information and communication technology, economic globalization that led to what they call borderless world. Because, or even today you take COVID, health issues, it's a borderless world. Whether the virus comes into your state or not, it's not given visa or anything to come in. So how are we going to deal with issues like environment, like the issues of ecology, issues of health in international relations? The contemporary era is marked by a deterritorialization of politics, rule and governance, although new forms of territorialization such as regionalism are evident as well. Meaning on one side, you are having globalization, but on the other side, there can also be fragmentation, what we said in the last lecture. Now, changing forms of political rule from empires to modern nation state. See, what this is basically geography of political power. It demarcated territorial areas within which there is an assumed to be a singular state which possesses internationally recognized borders. At the beginning of the second millennia, human civilization developed economic relative as isolation, discrete worlds. While they are highly sophisticated and in many respects culturally complex worlds, they had relatively little contact with one another, although they were not without some form of direct interchange. Meaning, see, in olden times, though technology was not there, even if you take the Greeks, Romans, they had come to South India, or the Cholas, one of the longest dynasties in India, 1600 years of rule, the longest dynasty in human history. And one of the greatest emperors ever India has seen was Rajendra Chola. He literally, developed trading posts and cultural posts in East and Southeast Asia. What we call the Indo-Pacific today was something that was a reality even during the time of the Cholas. Now, the early state forms the shifting extensity of political rule. See, initially you had imperial systems or empires. The history of state formation over the years, particularly in the size and grandeur, like you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Russians under the Tsars, the British, the Prussian, and the French. Retained identify institutional forms over long periods. They required an accumulation and concentration of coercive means, above all of military and war-making ability to sustain themselves. How did they become huge empires? Because they had to conquer. Like earlier, you had the Roman Empire, you had the several Indian empires, then you had the Persian empires. So if you see, they all were all because of coercive means. When this ability waned, imperial systems disintegrated. The deployment of military force was uppermost in the creation and maintenance of all frontiers of territorial boundaries, though the latter were often in flux and shifted according to the pattern of alliances, rebellion, and invasion. So boundaries kept changing. Now, early state forms the shifting extensity of political rule. While imperial systems were frequently crossed by long-distance trading routes, their economic requirements were largely met through the exaction of tribute, some of which was used to buy off threatened assaults if military power fell short. The tribute system supported the emperor, his administrative apparatus, and the military. Empires spread over a plethora of communities and societies which were culturally diverse and heterogeneous. Empires were ruled, but they were not governed. Emperors dominated a limited social and geographical space, but lacked administrative means, institutions, organizations, information, personnel, and so on. So please understand, empires existed, but there was a very different type of rule of how we know today. So the early state forms, if you see, the reach of military power and political power were not identical. The military and political power of states diminished at the periphery of their realm. They might overlap with more local systems of political rule or peripheries of other empires. Overlapping hues of local polities and adjacent empires would shift over a time. Meaning, see, empires flowed into each other. Sometimes they extended, that means boundaries were not very exact. Systems of divided authority in medieval Europe. See, those who prevailed over territories did so above all as military victors and conquerors, exacting tribute and rent. They were far from heads of state governing clearly demarcated boundaries and peoples, as the way we know the modern nation state. Political order was marked by interlocking ties and obligations with networks of rule fragmented into many small and autonomous parts. Now, systems of divided authority, why do we say in the medieval period? Because political power tended to be local and personal, in focus generating a world of overlapping claims and powers. The principle of territorial political rule was not yet privileged over other principles of political order, and accordingly no ruler or state sovereign in the sense of being supreme over a given territory or population. So sovereignty as a concept was never there during this period. Against this background, tensions were rife and war was frequent because of the shifting borders shifting power equations were very common. Systems of divided authority. Economic life in medieval Europe was dominated by agriculture, and any surplus generated within the economy was subject to rival claims. A successful claim helped constitute a basis to build and sustain political power. Latin Christendom and the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire what general unity it enjoyed. See, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman. The order of international Christian society for it was Christian first and foremost. It looked to God for the authority to resolve disputes and conflicts. Its primary political reference point was religious doctrine, and it was overlaid with assumptions about the universal nature of human community. Now, early modern states. Now, how did the modern states come into being? The emergence of the interstate system as we know it today. The developments that led to the erosion of medieval notions of politics are complex and many. You can't say there is only one reason. There are several reasons. Struggles between monarchs, princes, and barons over the domain of rightful authority. 2 peasant rebellions against the weight of taxation and obligation. 3, the spread of trade, commerce, and market relations. If you see here, absolutism and the emergence, the flourishing of the Renaissance culture with its renewed interest in classical political ideas, transformation in technology, especially military technology, the consolidation of national monarchies, religious strife and the challenge of the universal claims of Catholicism, and the struggle between the church and the state. See, early modern states, 2 dominant forms of political regimes came into being between the 15th and the 18th century. The absolute monarchies like that of France, Prussia, Spain, Austria, Russia, and Sweden, and the constitutional monarchies and republics that were found in England and Holland. Absolutism involved in the development of a form of state based on a number of elements, the absorption of smaller and weaker political units into a larger and stronger political structures. Now, the early modern states, what was it? It strengthened ability to rule over a unified territorial area. 2, a tightened system of law and order enforced throughout a territory. 3, the application of a more unitary, centralized and calculable rule by a single sovereign head. And 4, the emergence of a relatively small number of states engaged in an open-ended, competitive and risk-laden power struggle. Here, if you see, absolutism paved the way for the emergence of a secular and national system of power. See, initially, this whole history of secularism, most of you should understand, was within Christianity. Because of the 30 Years' War and several wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, they decided that they will, tolerate each other. So secularism was within Christianity. It was not for other religious groups. Let us be very clear on this. The concentration of power set in motion a series of developments that were of great significance to the history of political communities, including the growing incidence of territorial boundaries with a uniform system of rule, the concentration and extension of fiscal management, the constant centralization of administrative power, the introduction of standing armies, the creation of new mechanisms of law making and enforcement, and the formalization of relations among states through development of diplomacy and diplomatic institutions helped indicate a process of state making which began to reduce the social, economic, and cultural differences within states and expand differences among them, forge political communities with a clearer and growing sense of identity, national identity. See, the ability of states to secure and strengthen their power bases and thereby to order their affairs internally and externally. This in turn depended on their capacity to organize the means of coercion and to deploy them when necessary. Those states in particular able to draw on the resources of a large population, a relatively robust commercial economy, and a tradition of technological innovation. The dominant political forces laying down rules of the political game for others and wherever possible expanding the reach of their political jurisdiction. The European Society of States comes into being by the 17th century. By the end of the 17th century, principles of sovereignty and territoriality became supreme. Uncontestable authority on equal entitlement of autonomy and respect with their own borders. Sovereignty established an entitlement to rule over a bounded territory and possessed an autonomy to articulate and achieve its objectives in relation to other key agencies and social factors. As I told you earlier, this model is called the Westphalian model after the Treaty of Westphalia. The model covers the period of international law and regulation from 1648 to 1990, a long period. A normative trajectory in international law received full articulation in the late 18th century and early 19th century when territorial sovereignty, the formal equality of nations, non-intervention in the domestic affairs of other recognized states, and the consent as the basis of international legal obligation became the core principles of the international society. So these are the principles on which the Westphalian model began. Now when we say a Westphalian state, nation state, what do we mean? The world consists of and is divided into sovereign states which recognize no superior authority. 2. The process of lawmaking, the settlement of disputes and law enforcement are largely in the hands of individual states. 3. International law is oriented to the establishment of minimal rules of coexistence. The creation of enduring relationships among states and peoples is an aim, but only to the extent that, and it allows state objectives to be met. Responsibility for cross-border wrongful acts is a private matter concerning only those affected. All states are regarded as equal before the law. Legal rules do not take account of asymmetries of power, like the United Nations General Council, General Assembly. Every country, whether United States, Soviet Union, Russia now, or China, all of them have one vote, so does Maldives, Timbuktu, or any of those. So differences among states are often settled by force. The principle of effective power holds sway. Virtually no legal fetters exist to curb the resort of force. International legal standards afford minimal protection. The minimization of impediments to state freedom is the collective priority. The changing forms of political globalization. The European states' capacity for overseas operations by means of military and naval forces capable of long-range navigation. Hobsbawm puts this as perhaps because it was so largely built around Britain, the world economy of the 19th century capitalism developed as a single system of free flows, which the international transfers of capital commodities passed largely through British hands and institutions in British ships between the continents and were calculated in terms of pounds sterling. He is trying to explain the 19th century, which most of us came to know as Pax Britannica. Now, what are the changing forms of political globe? British naval and military power reinforced London's position as the center of world trade and finance. However, until this moment, no one single power was hegemonic. At least two powerful states were always contending for dominance in England, in Europe itself, and their interests and constantly clashed in colonial territories. The extension of world commerce drew non-state actors into these struggles. The colonies became the jewels of the crown of the new empires. So this is also the period of imperialism and colonialism. Through the imposition of trade monopolies and special commercial arrangements, each empire tried to secure exclusive control of the flow of trade and resources for its own enrichment. The enhancement of national prestige was another motivating factor. And here, if you see, the expansion of Europe across the globe enhanced the for organizations that would be capable of operating on such a scale. All the basic types of organization of modern society, the modern state, modern corporative enterprise, modern science, were shaped by it and benefited greatly from it. Imperial expansion became a major source of growth and state activity and power. Those states which were able to call on a sound administrative infrastructure, a substantial population, and a wide tax base, alongside arms and shipbuilding industries, gained advantage. And here, if you say, a new ordering of relations of domination and subordination among the major regions of the world, aided by new communications and transport infrastructures which facilitated new mechanisms of political power. European colonialism had often been propelled by a spirit of pioneering expansionism, aided and abetted by an interest in the exploitation of local conditions and infrastructures. By creating a form of political international order conducive to stability and the expansion of industrial capitalism, the new international organizations laid foundations of a more comprehensive, still fragmented system of global regulation in the 20th century. Now, if you see the new modern nation state and the world order, central to this emerging new international order was the modern nation state. Modern states are nation states people's apparatus, distinct from both ruler and ruled, with supreme jurisdiction over a demarcated territorial area, backed by a claim to a monopoly of coercive power and enjoying legitimacy as a result of minimum level of support and loyalty of citizens. So this is the type of nation state that you and me have been used to. And here, if you see, while all states have made claims to territories, like China has been still making claims to several territories of its neighbors, it is only with the modern nation state that the exact borders have been gradually fixed. Most post-war decolonization was especially important to this process. Through the claim to hold a monopoly on force and the means of coercion became possible only with the pacification of peoples, the breaking down of rival centers of power and the authority within the nation state, fragile achievement in many. The idea of an impersonal and sovereign political order is a legally circumscribed structure of power with supreme jurisdiction over territory could not prevail while political rights, obligations, duties were conceived as closely tied to religion and the claims of the traditionally privileged. When claims to divine right or state right were challenged and eroded, the loyalty of citizens became something that had to be by modern states. This involved a claim by the state to be legitimate because it reflected and represented the needs, wishes, and interests of its citizens. Meaning, earlier the kings ruled over certain territories on the issue of divine right or even state right. Now, how are you in democracies going to get the loyalty of your citizens? Through legitimate means, through elections, through democracy, and other means. And here, if you see, the modern nation state has acquired a particular political form. Its main variant has a crystallized as liberal or representative. Liberal democracy means that decisions affecting a community are taken by a subgroup of representatives who have been chosen or elected. Like we send people to the Lok Sabha. That is legitimized through the electoral process to govern within the framework of rule of law. And here if you see, what does it have? Rules and institutions are the establishment of mechanisms. The first is the constitutional entrenchment of control over governmental policy in elected representatives. Two, the establishment of mechanisms for the choice of and peaceful removal of elected representatives in frequent, fair, and free elections. Three, the right to vote for all adults in such elections. Four, the right to run for public office. Five, the effective right for each citizen to freedom of expression, including to criticize the conduct of government and the socio-economic system in which it is embedded. Six, accessible sources of information other than those controlled by government or by any other single body or group. And finally, an established right to form and join that could shape independent associations, whether they are political, social, or cultural, that could shape public life through legitimate and peaceful means. Now, if you see, democracy has been the major issue in this whole development. And Samuel Huntington gives us what to say. There have been three waves of democratization. He says the first long wave was from 1828 to 1926, when you have USA and Britain become democracies. And then you have where it goes down, that is 1922 to 1942, especially in Europe and Argentina, where democracy is totally shuttered out, with especially extremist organization rule, authoritarian, and what dictatorships like in Spain, Franco in Spain, Portugal, Salazar, Mussolini's fascism in Italy. You have Hitler in Nazi Germany and Japan. So you have democracy taking a back seat. And please understand that the rise of Hitler was due to a Weimar constitution, which was is thought till even today one of the best written constitutions in the world. And if most of you read Hannah Arendt, who was a very major thinker of the 20th century, the issue is how very well-educated industrialized states could welcome this type of extremist type of ideology, which also held a particular identity of people as scapegoats, the Jews and the Holocaust and the concentration camps. Second wave, short wave, he says, is 1943 to 1962. When West Germany, Japan, Italy, India, Israel become democratic states, and we are still democratic states. India is an oasis of democracy, and all us Indians must be proud of it. 1958 to 75, again a short reverse wave. You have Brazil, Argentina, Chile, several Latin American countries becoming dictatorships. And now he says you're in the third phase of democratization, where you're Portugal, Spain, Latin America, Africa, and East Europe until 1991. So these three waves of democratization is how we are looking at the state. Now the other question we are going to ask ourselves, and are we moving from a Westphalian state to a post-Westphalian state? Is sovereignty a hypocrisy? These ideas we would be discussing. So thank you so much. And here we will end with the ideas we have been able to generate on the Westphalian state and the territorial state. Thank you so much.